I'm here to talk about a more diverse agriculture for the future of our planet. And as I said before, this is really a team effort. And so what you can see here is a list of authors that work across the world. They're all individuals that work on sustainable food systems, that all have a belief in a better planet. And we've come together, and you can see, I mentioned Laura Vang Rasmussen, who is alongside Ingo Grass, our first authors of this paper, and put a lot of effort into making the research happen. But there's a kind of this shared agreement and this shared belief amongst all of us in terms of a bright and positive future. And that really is what drives us in this work. What we eat and how we produce that food is possibly the single most important factor driving the transgression of planetary boundaries. Whether you're talking about climate change, whether you're talking about biodiversity loss, single most factor driving biodiversity loss across the planet, land system change, a third of our planet is being used for agricultural production. Freshwater change, 80 to 90% of our freshwater use is used for agriculture, and the list goes on. There's something kind of disturbing about this, and when you think about it, there's actually something fundamental, that the way that our agriculture and food systems are designed has flaws. We actually have flaws in the design of our food systems, and I just want you to hold that in your head. When we look at agricultural systems, the production of food, what we actually find is many of our agricultural systems are grossly oversimplified. And this has been driven by decades of agricultural development policy that's been centered on the idea, a package deal, of seeds and improved breeds with fertilizers and water and machinery. And that's brought many benefits to us. We produce a lot of calories across the world, but it's come with very large environmental and social externalities. So what we as a group of researchers came together to do was think about a very, very simple question, which we had all been doing actually individually in our own study systems, as I mentioned earlier. We came together to ask this question that we'd all been asking individually. We asked this question across the world: if more diversity is added into or kept on farms during those transitions, what happens to environmental and social outcomes? Do we actually create a better world for people and nature? And so an important fact here is there's actually quite a lot we can learn from nature. If you look at natural systems, we see a number of different things that relate to diversity. The first of those is we see that animals and plants are coupled in those systems. Very different from concentrated animal feeding facilities and monocultures that we see at the pinnacle of agricultural development today. We see change over time in our natural systems, temporal diversity. We see diversity in our landscapes that help us cycle water. We see teeming life in soil in our natural landscapes. And the hallmark of all of these, potentially, is that these all represent complexity. What we did as researchers, alongside many farmers, across thousands of farms in the world, is ask the question: if we embed these innovations from nature in farming systems, what's the outcomes? What do we see? And so these are some examples of this. There's many examples, obviously there's thousands of farms, but here's a farm integrating crops and livestock. Here's one integrating rotation. We have retention of trees in landscapes here, crop residue incorporation there, and a pollinator kind of hedgerow here in strawberry systems down there. These are just some of the examples, and if you'd like to read more, you can go and see the paper. There's many examples of these different things. What we found was extremely promising. So we found that, and this is the take-home, that as you model nature in agricultural systems and agricultural farms and landscapes, it typically improves outcomes we care about. So we assessed a number of different outcomes: biodiversity, ecosystem services, reduced externalities, alongside social ones. And this was really one of the key breakthroughs of this research. We were also assessing what it means for people, how it impacts people. And we found that food security and yield and human well-being, the things that we assessed, we see positive outcomes for food security, a really critical one there. We see positive outcomes for the environmental kind of biodiversity is a very strong one there. And we also find, and this is really important, we found when we compared and we looked at all of these different studies, that actually the dominant narrative, or that you would get a yield trade-off in these systems, wasn't present. And in fact, in some of these kind of diversification practices, you can see the livestock diversification one, you actually see yields increase in those systems. Some of these practices, punch above their weight, including, soil conservation and animal integration. But one of the other take-homes that we found in this research, that we found really, really encouraging, is that the more of these things you do, like the more you try and model farming systems after nature, the more different types of practices, I showed you 5 different buckets of things, the more different types of things you do to try and increase soil diversity, the more different types of things you try to do to improve water cycling and so on, you actually amplify the positive outcomes that you see from any one of those strategies. Not only that, when you stack these strategies together, you also see that amplifying effect. And so that was really, really kind of really encouraging for us. And you can see these kind of effects that are amplified at the bottom here. One of the nice things about this work is that we were working on real-world farms with real-world farmers. And we've talked about kind of like co-authors, and those should be up on the stage, but actually, really who should be up on the stage is the thousands of farmers that we worked with and the communities they represent. The cool thing about working on real-world farms is that it allows us to think about scaling. When you do something in the lab or you do something on a research station, often the differences in the effect sizes to what you see in the field can be, you might see an 80% increase in an experiment, and you might only see like a 10% in the field. Right? So the real value of doing stuff on farms is that these signals came through amongst all of the noise that we see in the real world, and that was really encouraging to us. We didn't plan it, but by working together as a team across these different environments and different farming systems, we actually generated a typology, and I showed you these kind of 5 buckets of things, of interventions that can be used in practical settings by NGOs, in policy, and different development organizations and civil society groups that are working for a more sustainable food system. There are obviously policy windows for this kind of work, and it shows that investment in this can actually yield desirable outcomes. Now, we're absolutely thrilled to be an international winner. The team is very, very thrilled. And there are a number of ways that we'd like to use this award. And me and Laura have been speaking to people in the break, and we're lots of really cool ideas. But one of the key things that this rests on, and this is the last one of these bubbles that you can see on the screen, is building a larger and stronger coalition. So when we started this research, and when I first wrote the application to pull people to the table from different areas across the world that are studying this stuff, we only actually had a relatively small group, I think around 10 researchers. We had a number of different organizations that worked as a stakeholder advisory committee. But over the years of doing the research, we found that the number of authors you saw was close on 60, it quadrupled at least. That research was done on a shoestring though. And so we see massive opportunity for this investment in terms of building out this network. We know there are other researchers that are doing this work across the world. We know there are other organizations. We know there are other farmers. And we know there are other inspirational leaders in these communities. And we are really excited about building a stronger coalition going forward. Doing that will allow us to do many things that we're dreaming about at the moment. So one of them is that we think we've just scratched the surface in terms of the innovations that we can bring into farming systems. And we know that there are more discoveries to be made. And as scientists, that really excites us, all the new discoveries that we can make with this stronger coalition. There's a lot of opportunity for extension and improved implementation of these innovations. And as Johan was mentioning earlier, we see a lot of opportunity as well for embedding agroecology and sustainable farming in the global models. So to date, what we've seen is many of these papers that you see out there in the high-impact journals will talk about the future of the planet, talk about the future of humanity. And in that, they will model food systems, but they won't model these sustainable farming practices. So we see a lot of benefits in the future of this research for actually building that into the global models to change the conversation. We also see a lot of opportunity for engaging the public in the research. So through immersive visual experiences and exhibits to enable individuals to re-envision the future of farming together. And of course, train the next generation. Train the next generation of scholars and bring forward the next generation of leaders who would be hopefully winning the Planet Prize in years to come. So I just want to end on this one point. When you look at the future of farming based on our current trajectory, and you look out to 2100, and you look at the business as usual economic development, what we'll expect is by the year 2100, we would have halved the number of farms on the planet. Now, it isn't that those farms are going to go away. What's going to happen is they're going to get bigger. And on average, what we're going to see is by 2100, the average size of a farm in the world would have doubled. Now, if you look at the history and the historical empirical data that we have, what happens in that case is that we lose diversity from our landscapes. And with it comes a lot of negative environmental impacts. So that's a negative story. The positive story is where our research comes in. We actually show that even with this development, it's possible to engineer and embed nature in our agricultural landscapes. And that is really inspiring. The future that we thought we had before has now changed. We can now envision a future that is much more positive for the planet. And so with that, what I'd like you to do is just take 10 seconds. I'd like everyone to close their eyes with me and take yourself to an agricultural landscape that you may have experienced in the past, or you may have read about in a book. And imagine what that landscape would look like if it embedded nature. Imagine the benefits that that would have for the future of food and for the people and the planet. Thank you.